by the already I'm in a few months of leave of absence, so I'm a bit freer talker than state secretary, and I rather address the topic as an education and to some extent also science and technology expert too. On the slides, I just had a few roles I have been in the last 20 years. So I've served both academia, and I'm adjunct professor at the University of Helsinki, and then the parliament and the government. But then also we have a company with University of Helsinki on early education called Hey Schools. And finally, very topical today, I've been working in the Balkan region, in particular in Bosnia and Herzegovina, since the war in 1990s on education, and we are running a school for children coming from different backgrounds there. I just mentioned this because I think it's always good to know when people are also giving their views a little bit at where they come from with their views. Next slide, please. But today, so I chose as my topic, and I think it fits very well to the previous speakers, elements of AI and other tools for all, Finnish experience and developments. I think the previous speakers have really set very nicely the scene, both in terms of the various currently running European programs that in my state secretary role at the Ministry of Traffic and Communication I've been very much involved with but also I think the scene was set in terms of the basic values, problematic issues on a policy and political decision-making level. So it allows me to dig a bit into more perhaps already somewhat practical approaches and then come to some proposals at the end. And I chose two themes, and the first one was very briefly actually referred to by Mrs. Dioli, so she built me a nice bridge, the elements of artificial intelligence cause and some experiences. So let's start with that, and next slide, please. And here I'm borrowing actually slides from a professor friend from the University of Helsinki. I think it's just because this is very much a product of the university that we've been then able to promote as decision makers. So the idea of the elements of AI course originally at the university was to create an open source online course for broad audience involving a company in the design so that it would also technically be very easily accessible. Not only people who would sort of go and Google AI, but perhaps for people who feel curious but also a bit hesitant, and so that they would also feel comfortable in the way the course was designed. Currently, and this shows nicely how easily things are also spread. So it's not 685,000 registered users, but I checked the figure from last week was over 800,000. And as was mentioned, this became a European Union project at the end of the presidency of Finland in 2019. And I think it's worth sharing the story very briefly. We were actually contacted, the minister and myself, by people from who had been actively developing this course, with the idea that what about we propose that this course is made available in all EU languages and that it will be the immaterial gift of the Finnish EU presidency. First, it of course sounded something that, yes, sounds like a good idea, but how do we somehow concretize something like this in humans? But luckily, there were friends in the commission who offered to do the translations, and then we managed to convince people particularly in our budget department in Finland, that some funds could be used to then promote a course in different countries and also to localize some of its content. And so it started then the launch in 2020, while before the course had been available in English, Finnish, Swedish, German, and Estonian, so it was made available in all EU languages plus Icelandic and Norwegian. And then, of course, university people have listed some of the awards the course has won over last 2-3 years. I really challenge all of you to try it out, perhaps in English, perhaps in your own language. I've done it a little bit of it in both. and it's structured in a way, as you can see on your left hand. So you have 6 or 7 chapters with 3 subtitles, and there are also some exercises. It's pretty fast, so if you are familiar with the topics, it gives you you proceed very fast, and then you can also test, do you think it would fit, for instance, to some of your friends, your children, your parents, etc. Next slide, please. As a continuation of the elements of AI, which is all the time up and running, the University of Helsinki has now also created a sort of advanced course, Building AI, which is a little bit more technical, and it already allows you to do some calculations and programming yourself. And it also offers 3 different levels of difficulty. So again, to make it somewhat accessible for different types of people. But if the basic elements of AI was for AI consumers, so all the citizens we would like to see, of course, noting the digital gaps and so on. This Building AI is perhaps a little bit more for those who are already contributing, so working or managing AI projects. But so this was launched at the same time as the EU presidency language translation for different countries. And it's, of course, has been used much less. But again, here we had numbers from a few weeks ago, it was 20,000. This week, it was 42,000. So these things tend to spread. And the structure is very much the same as with the elements of AI. Next slide, please. So just how the university has analyzed so far elements of AI course. So I think what I would pick from their thoughts was that, yes, I agree that the pedagogical style, it's not something that you get excited with. It's rather old school. There aren't videos, but there are illustrations. And the idea was really that it would somehow feel comfortable also for those who are so perhaps not so digitalized or who don't feel so at home in, for instance, courses that are online. So in my mind, I believe personally that perhaps it's been quite successful to do it this way, while I also understand the criticism from some students, for instance, who say it's a bit boring. So it's made somewhat simplistic, and I think it should also work therefore for instance, for older populations that do use computers but perhaps are not so used to online learning. And I pick another interesting figure here because we already discussed during the Mrs. Searle's presentation about the gender balance. So just during last 2-3 years, we've increased the admission of females to computer science in Helsinki University from 22% to 23, 28. And I really believe it's thanks to these kind of sort of open access projects that have somehow brought forward the a bit different nature of computer science, if you like. Next slide. And this is the last slide from the university package where, well, next slide is coming and I'll talk it over anyway, where of course the third element, so if we had the basics elements of AI, then we had the technical implications, building AI course. So then the third one obviously must be then ethics. And this was launched also at the end of 2020, and it's been done together in cooperation with several European cities from London to Amsterdam and Helsinki. This I have not yet, I haven't familiarized myself, so I can't say more. I'm just because I'm still on that technical course level. But once I get done, I will send feedback. Next slide. Then just briefly, another development or comment or tool I thought I should just mention here is our digital compass that we all, of course, are familiar with. Next slide. Because I think the digital compass with its four elements, and one of them being the skills, does provide for countries a tool which to use when trying to find out what would be perhaps for us the best ways to look into the digitalization for all issue. And we could take next and then the next slide. And let's go to the next one. This is picture familiar for everyone from the compass. So if we take from the digital compass the skills, in Finland we are currently working on our digital compass version, and recently, a few weeks back, we had a working group meeting on each of the 4 elements. And in the element of, or in the dimension of skills, these were the 3 issues that we singled out as something we want to start developing in terms of measures and also concrete projects perhaps later on. So first one, the emphasis on the idea of being a citizen of digital age. What does that actually mean, and what are the sort of implications of it for citizens themselves and for the public sector in particular, but of course also for companies. Then there is the skills element, which has been discussed quite a lot already for today. And here we are referring to different parts of education system and adult education, workplace education, and so on, that what kind of constant upskilling we actually perhaps need. And finally, what I personally perhaps consider almost most important when we also discuss the differences between countries is this broader idea of education for digital age. We have a word in Finnish that is close to German Bildung, which has a bit broader meaning than education as education. So it does include informal education and also this idea of being a good citizen, having a just society, and so on. And so within that framework of education for digital age, we've seen such issues as ethics, trust, transparency, transparent use of one's data and digital information, and so on. So it's through these 3 elements that we are now, 3 headings that we are at the moment looking at the digital compass work in Finland when it comes to skills. Next slide, which is also the last one. So I gave myself an opportunity to give some conclusive thoughts if some have already come up while listening to the others, and I would, if the moderator allows, just summarize them into 3. The first one is that I do think we have quite some tools already to work on the AI and digital literacy for all. I described the elements of AI, and there are others. And I think it's up to us also to make sure people are aware of these and encouraged to use them. Second, the next level, and I think it was already touched upon, must be the sort of systemic level, curriculums, formal education, and very importantly, already mentioned in the beginning, for instance, workplaces and different places where different segments of societies meet. I would, for instance, imagine that the elements of AI course could be actually offered at workplace, and you could use some of your working time for it if that was found relevant. And finally, thirdly, I think one conclusive thought I have is that, as was mentioned, education is not part of the, it is a national competency, and therefore within the EU, we have somewhat perhaps limited opportunities. However, in this moment in time, I do see there are many opportunities opening to think education also on sort of global scale, and there EU really could take a leader role. And I just leave you with a thought: what if we, for instance, developed in the few years some pilots for, let's say, artificial intelligence and climate change on a sort of curricular material that we would share within the member states, and why not also with some others, and thereby we would also bring young people to think matters together through same materials, and also develop our understanding of those topical issues that are topical in every country. So that's for today, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ms. Torsti. The sun has decided to enlighten myself. That is quite important. We're talking about enlightenment. So I'm going to encourage our participants, our attendants, to participate actively in their debate. If anyone have a question to raise to Ms. Torsti, this is the time. If not, I encourage as well to the participants, to the speakers themselves to speak each other. This is a lively event. It's absolutely open in the method, just to make this kind of interventions. If not, I'm going to ask some questions that arise me of your intervention. I don't see anyone for the moment, so I'm going to make by my own. One of them, just listen to you about the Finland experience. I was thinking that Finland for many years, almost always, was on top of this called PISA inform about skills, about the education of young people in the member states, sorry, in all OECD, and you know that PISA try to rate things like reading, like mathematics, like the traditional skills, the things that were meant to make a better students. I don't know if you found a way to link your program with this educational program of traditional education program of Finland, and if in such way PISA is now at least thinking about to measure this kind of abilities, just to rate the level of the pupils and the young people in the countries. And besides, I'd like to make another one because I'm concerned about some of the groups of society. My colleague before was questioning about weak people, no, weak groups. That is one of the aim that we as S&D family are interested the most. But just concretely, how ensure to these abilities and the gift of these abilities are inclusive and include, for instance, elderly people that, from my perspective, are people that beforehand you think that the acquisition of these abilities could be more resilient, more difficult. And what about some kinds of disabled people? I don't know if you were pointed out your aim and your goals on disabled people, or you had some kind of different tool in order to touch these groups. I don't know. I'd like to know it. The floor is yours, of course.
Yes, thank you. So if I group under two themes your sort of relatively broad question, one on education and the second one on vulnerable groups of society. Now, perhaps I start with the latter one. Of course, it's obvious that in all countries, regardless of the level of digital skills and the standing in any indexes, we then see differences and yes, age groups, elderly people, perhaps being the most noted, but also others. And of course, that is true to Finland as it is to any country. Then, of course, there is variety in degrees. Few so perhaps thoughts, not necessarily not solutions here. One public service that we've used quite a lot over the years, over decades already, first with providing some computers, space to use computers and learn about computers, and now increasingly also to learn about different digital services are public libraries. The newest public library in Helsinki was already designed in such a way that it can be very much a multi-purpose place, and I do think that the public libraries can present us one way to look into the sort of new phenomenon in the society and how do we reach different groups of society, and which are places that are available for free and so on. With elderly people, you of course have to first of all make sure that you do provide all your public services accessible also without digital skills, and we have to be very careful also that we don't create barriers. However, also from the sort of perspective of observing a lot of that segment quite a lot in my personal life, I do think we should also always remember to recognize the opportunities, both for instance, you mentioned elderly and people with disabilities, that we've seen, of course, development of many tools that actually help these groups. If you have difficulties in moving away from your home, you can actually get more and more services, both, for instance, related to your personal needs, health, food, and so on, but also entertainment through digital means, and we just have to make sure that the devices are there and there is support when needed. And here, of course, we've seen during the pandemic quite some leaps also forward. But generally speaking, I do think it would be actually for our political group to look at this issue strategically, not both as a really a problematic issue, as an issue of equality. If we talk about human-centric AI, we also have to have the real examples to present very soon, and those examples have to be for all segments of society if we are to be honest to our real values. And due to lack of time, I will not go to some. We did some analysis of this actually during the pandemic, and we can come back to that later. Then in terms of education, generally
Apparently, we have a problem with the connection. We'll try to fix it.
now, I think, correct.
Yeah,
So the second on
we can hear you.
yeah, the second on education, the literacy issue overall, so not digital literacy, but literacy and reading skills, has been of huge concern in Finland. We've dropped in our results in PISA, and currently there is something what we call reading movement that is trying to address this, which is publicly funded. And I will perhaps just mention one example what I think is important in all approaches develop, and it's the teacher autonomy that is on a very high level in Finland, which means that the teachers also can then assess a little bit their classroom situation and how they, for instance, can use devices to help the support of the reading of books and so on, whether they, for instance, use electric books, whether they provide students with certain games that actually help them to learn to read faster and better and so on. And such devices are used quite a lot. I would stress it's very important teachers have the autonomy, because you have very different students in different parts of the country, different age groups, and so on, so on. So you can't really lead that from above too much, but you have to provide then relevant skills for the teacher, and then let them to sort of decide on a classroom level a little bit that how they utilize them. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tosti. I don't know if there's anyone that would like to make some questions or so. We can wait 2 seconds. If not, we are going to switch to the other speaker of this evening. I'd like to introduce Inma Martinez. And first of all, I have to say that I am a surrender admirer of our next speaker. She is among a lot of things. She's member of the expert group, the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence for Innovation and Commercialization of AI, and co-chair of the AI for Agriculture and Farming Task Force. Inma Martinez is an advisor to leaders in businesses and government on how to turn digital transformation into competitive advantage and contribute to societal progress. There are a lot of different topics that Inma Martinez is involved, education, assessment, a lot of them. So just today, she's going to speak about our main topic, about illustration of people and artificial intelligence. So directly I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Martinez. So, Inma, si estás por ahí, tienes la palabra.
Thank you, Iban, and thank you very much for the kind invitation of this group to allow me to present and to add value to the general thinking and what we all aiming to create for Europe. I chose to speak about one of the fundamental objectives that in the AI community we aim for, which is to create a human-centric AI, but also ensure that this AI is explainable to the people and it's
Imma Martinez, can you please press the speak button? Thank you.
I had my speak button on. Somehow it was disconnected. Can I be heard now?
No, now it's running. So
Okay.
going on.
Do I start from the beginning?
No, I don't need well, we don't need the so.
Okay. So I wanted to focus on the need for AI to be human-centric, which is an objective from the AI community of which I am part of. And just to remind everyone, the first attempt to create a human-driven AI system dates back to the late 90s. And it was thanks to an algorithm called collaborative filtering that, of course, will mean nothing to most people. But if I tell you that that was the algorithm that Amazon offered to suggest the people who bought this book also bought this other one, human-centric AI begins with a desire to serve people and to recommend and personalize. And the second objective that we in the AI community have is that AI must be explainable and AI must be flexible and be mindful of the context in which it is deployed. So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to clarify really what is it that we mean that something is human-centric. It really is addressing human needs and also that is fit for humans to use with safety, with enjoyment, with reliability, and with purpose. So it has to obey the usability and functionality and conveniency of the majority of products and services in the world, but it above all, it has to address humans' needs and aspirations. So if we move to the next slide, how we design this type of digital services and AI services is by using the Maslow hierarchy of needs. So AI systems are being trained to adapt to the physical needs of people. For example, they can detect if it's a child at the keyboard or if it's an old person moving the mouse over the screen. So we know the vulnerability, we know the needs of this individual user. And of course, we also are mindful of people with physical disabilities that the entire system has to serve, for example, people that need to have a sound system playing the text, etc. If we move to the need for people to trust a system, we need to ensure that it's non-biased, and we need to ensure that any details, any information that a person puts into a system are safeguarded. Okay, so those are the basic pillars of anything built in digital and driven by AI. But AI is used in very, very abstract context, for example, social media. And therefore, we move into AI systems that have learned to interpret humans' reactions, the human need to be understood, the human need to have a self-identity that is appreciated by everyone. And this is where AI is being deployed in the world and yet not very transparent as to how it's being built. So if we move to the next slide, everything comes down to personalizing digital services to a person in order to fulfill what this person needs, but also what this person aspires. And the majority of AI systems that are trying to aim for personalization, they lack flexibility and they lack real understanding of the contexts in which people make decisions, which is why the majority failed to fulfill this golden globe of creating a bespoke experience, a one-to-one experience for individuals. So if we move to the next slide, if we were to develop an AI human-centric system and aim to create good in the world, we would achieve three main things. One, we would be able to be in a position to make better decisions. When AI handles data in large amounts and AI is trained to then understand the context in which people operate, we are able to offer a superior quality of strategic thinking, better choices, and really aiming for less and less mistakes and less frustrations. When we are also confronted with enormous amounts of data and when they need to scale things, for example, people that go and have a CT scan or an MRI test of their cancer tumors, we want this system to be able to see what an analog doctor cannot see and then scale it up to be able to service thousands of people. Yeah. So we need to start focusing on the mindfulness of the environments in which people really need things to be perfect, to scale up, and to also be mindful of their emotions. And last but not least, when behavioral psychologists, even philosophers, work with AI scientists and software developers, we all begin to create something that potentially could resemble a humanistic approach to delivering AI to the world, which right now it does not really exist. And this is why this is the central area for us in AI to achieve in this next 10 years. If we move to the next slide, then in truth and in real action, when you train algorithms to be human-centric, you need to train them to really operate in the real world, in the world where the humans live. And this is why, for example, level 5 automation of vehicles is still going to take a very long time, even though we are training with computer vision um, to interpret what is in front of me when I am a car. Is this a person? Is this a truck? And if you want to see how good everything is developing, we have all trained Google's AI computer vision algorithm every time we say that we are not a robot and we have to click on the images of, yeah, these are all bicycles. Yeah, but still we need to train the algorithms to live in the world where we live, which is immense and full of a million possibilities of what something could be. So interpreting the world, interpreting what is happening is still very, very hard for an AI system to achieve. If we move to the next slide. So what does it mean to create a human-centric algorithm? Fundamentally, it is an algorithm that it learns to serve humans the best that it can. So, for example, we have algorithms that are human-centric and they detect mental health issues, if some people display addictive behaviors. And what is at stake? That whomever has this type of algorithms driving their products and services will use them for good, for the highest benefit of the people using them and not in their detriment, as we have seen certain companies taking advantage of this, superiority of algorithms. We also train algorithms to be human-centric in order to really make collective group segmentations of people, not because of their gender, not because of their age, not because of their race, but really based on what they do, not what they say that they do. So most of these AI systems are observational and they really are mindful of why did this person did this in this context in order for us to understand the motives. And really, the main goal of a human-centric algorithm is to make predictions. what is it that this person would do if I was to change any of the context, or if she was or he was going to come for the 10th time into the system? You know, we must anticipate the needs. So human-centric has to be driven by the greater good and by really servicing the beneficiaries, which are citizens of this world. So if we move to the last slide, I want to run you through pretty much how we then service the famous Maslow's pyramid. So for example, you know, a human-centric AI algorithm minding disabilities, or for example, ensuring that it can be trusted, that there is a safety within the system, or for example, that it's mindful of emotions, therefore it has to provide assurance and trust, and obviously understanding that the majority of people create lives and lifestyles whenever they buy and use products, you know, that we never erode the self-esteem of individuals. Yeah. If we go to the next iteration, please, then self-actualization. This is the kingdom of Instagram, you know. What is it that I am building of myself, and therefore I have to be protected by the system? Yeah. So if we move to the next one, it's got to do with how we deal with humans. Are we dealing with them in baskets, or are we trying to deal with them individually? Yeah. So user segmentations have to be better driven by the greater good. Are we putting people in baskets where they don't belong? Am I being recommended ads, and am I being recommended videos that really have nothing to do with who I am, etc., etc.? So there's a lot of work to do in that area, you know, the way we classify humans. And in the next group is really, I think it's about predicting. If we are training algorithms to predict human behavior, it has to be based on what these individuals do and intimate knowledge of their lives. Otherwise, we will not be serving them correctly. We will then presenting to them a version of what we believe is what they want. And one of the greatest examples of this is extreme personalization of internet browsers is really making the internet become a funnel. So I'm not sure if when I Google something or I look for something on Bing, am I seeing the whole of the internet, or what the system thinks that I should see? So we're losing civil liberties if this is exploited. And last but not least, and the most important to me, is if we are going to measure people's behaviors and reactions, we have to create human-centric AI-driven systems that are fair, that provide equity of services and products, that are inclusive, that allow for intercultural values to come into play, and obviously that, you know, it is protective of the human mind and the human condition. You know, that humans are fragile people that we must treasure. So I will leave it at that because it's a lot of information, and I will be delighted to answer your questions.
Gracias, Inma. I'm going to ask again for participants. I'd like to encourage you to raise the hand in the Interactio tool, or give us a notice of your interest to participate by any other means. I don't see for the moment anyone, so I'm going to ask by myself again. There's someone, I think. Okay. So I'm going to give the floor to the Tosti, to Ms. Tosti Pilvi. She's asking for the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As we already in advance encouraged to interact as much as is possible through the funnels where we find out each other's these days. I first of all would like to thank, I think this presentation was very good and precise in sort of presenting the different elements that what the human centricity of artificial elements implies to. And it will be great to get the presentation if possible afterwards, because I think it's a helpful tool to describe for different audiences. What I was interested to hear to be developed a little bit more is what's your current view uh, on the developments, and I take the example of the, which is often of course given to us decision makers, that there were lots of expectations concerning the self-driving cars, say 10, a little less than 10 years ago. And then we've seen many of the developments actually being slower. And then we've started to understand also the limitations of the artificial intelligence to some extent. And I think it has also been perhaps good for people to understand that some developments can't be predicted, because then there may be obstacles that we didn't foresee. So what is currently, where do you see the sort of room for development? If you take your last slide where there were many interesting aspects mentioned, so where do you think in this sort of human-centric approach we have the greatest promise, which will perhaps also, we should perhaps also prepare our populations for?
Thank you. Imma, the floor is yours.
Kiitos Torsti. Tervetuloa. I'm glad to say that I was a member of the AI community who built the first personalization system of the mobile internet. So I worked many years in dear Finland. So when we put any kind of digital system in the hands of people, especially with AI, because AI tends to make lots of decisions by itself, it has an intelligence that is embedded, we need to ensure that people are not overwhelmed and people are not overridden. So for example, the cars is a good example. No one has level 5 cars of full automation working on the streets, yeah, because we don't have the regulatory framework. But indeed, many car makers already have level 3. And I'll give you the difference between a good AI-driven system and one that is terrible. In the US, Tesla has level 3 cars, and people tend to lift their hands off the steering wheel and the car goes by itself. And in many occasions, this has caused accidents. Whereas in Europe, the auto industry, especially in Germany, these cars, these vehicles, if the driver lifts the hands, the vehicle instructs the driver to put them back on the steering wheel. And if the person doesn't do that, the car will then signal to the other cars that is going to move out of the road, and then it will gently cross over all the lanes by itself, insisting the driver to put the hands in the steering wheel, and then it will park itself on the side of the road and call the emergency systems, because the car will assume that this person is having a heart attack or is completely unwell to be able to drive. Now that is the difference between one regulatory system and another. And both cars can do the same thing, but one has been instructed to safeguard the individual and be mindful that people should still put their hands in the steering wheels. So one of the aims that we have in the AI community is that citizens and internet and digital services users have to become AI savvy. They are the beneficiaries of products and services that are powered and AI driven, but also we need them to understand and to detect, is this recommendation being thrown at me because there is an AI behind it that is learning from me? We need to make them AI savvy. Why? Because they will be more careful with their data. They will also learn to override the system. No, Mr. Google Maps, I don't want to turn right here because this is my neighborhood and I know that I can continue straight. this type of the human still can override the system is very, very important in the early stages of us putting AI in the hands of people. So fundamentally, any product and service that is digital and is powered by AI has to abide by the ethics of AI. It cannot harm the person. It has to be transparent so it can be audited, especially, for example, if people are applying for jobs. The company putting these applications in the market and developing the AI should be audited. They need to demonstrate that at no point the algorithm is always choosing single white males for the jobs, or that it has been trained to offer these individuals higher salaries than what is offering to the women, for example. So it needs to be auditable. And I think that in as much as we are now trying to educate European citizens to be digitally savvy, we also need to teach them how to be AI savvy.
Una muy buena reflexión. En cualquier caso, el ejemplo del coche me parece muy clarificador de cómo realmente el marco regulatorio importa casi tanto como la tecnología en sí mismo. Me gustaría hacer una pregunta, hablando precisamente de la comprensión y de los derechos también que tienen que tener los ciudadanos. Nosotros desde el grupo de socialistas y demócratas en el Parlamento Europeo estamos intentando impulsar una declaración europea que se convierta también en una carta de derechos posteriormente sobre la cuestión digital, sobre los derechos en el ámbito digital que tienen que tener las personas, no solo desde el punto de vista, como decía, declarativo, eso es un primer paso, sino también para que sean después absolutamente obligatorios y que sean principios que se tienen que cumplir en la realidad y en la práctica, precisamente para guiar este desarrollo de la transformación digital de nuestras sociedades. Me gustaría saber cuál es tu opinión con respecto a la necesidad de tener una Carta de Derechos. Hace no tanto tiempo que también la Administración norteamericana ha planteado la posibilidad de hacer una Declaración de Derechos. El propio Estado español hace un tiempo, en este caso de manera pionera, hizo una declaración también en ese mismo sentido. Luego hay que, por supuesto, elevarlo a una cuestión que sea, como decía, obligatoria y que tenga una trascendencia también en la práctica, ¿no? Me gustaría saber cuál es tu visión de la necesidad de tener esas cartas de derechos. Esta es una de las preguntas. Y la segunda, hablando de precisamente esa comprensión también general que tienen que tener los ciudadanos y también, por supuesto, desde lo que tiene que ser un principio de la democratización del proceso, es decir, el establecimiento de prioridades sociales, de las velocidades también que hay que seguir en determinados desarrollos o qué cosas no se deben hacer. Con respecto a esto, será necesario implementar necesariamente, como digo, un diálogo entre administraciones y la propia ciudadanía. Pero, por supuesto, el gran reto es saber cómo tenemos que hacerlo. Y en ese sentido aquí estamos haciendo también reflexiones de cómo establecer esa obligación, esa obligatoriedad de forma que hagamos algo que sea práctico, es decir, que funcione más allá de cumplir con X reuniones cada cierto tiempo simplemente para verse las caras unos a otros. Es decir, existe además, no sé si en tu conocimiento, existe algún país, alguna región, algún ayuntamiento que esté haciendo esto ya, es decir, que esté estableciendo foros útiles de diálogo entre administración y ciudadanía para poder guiar también este proceso de una manera lo más colectiva y democrática posible.
I'll continue in English just because of the, how I started. But you were asking about una Carta Magna. I think it's really, really important that we remind everyone that humans and their rights cannot be overridden just because somebody is on a website. One of the things that, as a digital pioneer, I have been fighting my entire life is to ensure that people maintain the same rights that they enjoy in the analog world in the digital world. And there's many discrepancies that somehow they go under the carpet. And I believe that we need to start creating this Carta Magna so that we create a homogenic experience for everyone, especially now that we're entering into the future metaverse, where most people will not distinguish when they are in the virtual reality from when they step outside their house. So fundamentally, yes, is very much needed. And also, I think Europe will have the lead at international level of, how would we treat human beings as beneficiaries of products and services. I do not like the word user. I like a beneficiary. I am accessing this online shop because I am a client. I am a beneficiary of what it offers, and therefore we need to be mindful of their rights, of their disposition, of how they should be served at the best of anyone's ability. So absolutely, a Carta Magna is needed. Now, I live and work in the UK, and in the UK, not so much about forums between citizens and the government, but there is a traditional modern operandi of what is called the All Parliamentary Party Group, meaning these are open get-togethers of serving members of parliament and then industry experts and anybody else that wants to come along, in which real issues are dealt in the hope that these could become themes and propositions that then members of parliament will bring into the House of Commons. So I think that most citizens would like more transparency and more plain English in what is it that they are receiving. I think that the majority of people did not understand what the GDPR was. And I have never seen a government teaching people how to be savvy online and know that you don't need to read a bunch of terms and conditions to know fundamentally when someone online, a company, is asking way too many things of you. Or I believe in the education of citizens. For example, I remember some years ago in 2010, Google did a massive campaign in the tube, in the subways, teaching people how to create very, very safe passwords. Because the majority of people, the password is 12345 or the word password. So they wanted to educate the population, and first of all, please be safe and make safety part of your daily activity. So I believe that governments creating opportunities for citizens to express themselves and to really talk about their fears or what really is of concern to them when they use AI or they use digital services, and for us to have an open blank document where we gather all of that and we try to address it with honesty and with mindfulness. I think it's a genius idea, and I'm wholly supportive of it.
So thank you very much. And by the way, you remind me that I have to update my passwords, my WhatsApp passwords. So I'll take it into account. Is there any other question? No, I don't see anyone else. So I'm going to. Sorry. There's a question indeed.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to all the speakers because it was quite interesting. I have a question for Imma, because the implementation of AI in social media is bringing us great things. For example, Instagram is now able to detect users or beneficiaries that might be through an eating disorder or might need of mental health assistance, and that is amazing. That is such an advance. But we are also being progressively informed of the risk that having AI algorithm might pose for the citizenry. For example, the risk of being radicalized more easily because the person only gets posts from a particular ideology in Facebook. So my question is, are we considering the development of not so perfect algorithm where not 100% of the content is personalized?
Thank you for your question. Well, AI is intention neutral. It does what it does, and it's up to the company putting the product and service to really steer it in one direction to actually do the good or into the evil side of things. So I have been collaborating for years with the Mozilla Foundation, trying to demonstrate that the majority of the video recommendations on YouTube, for example, are in detriment of humans, and sometimes they're like really not targeted. It's simply, they just want to put more and more pre-roll ads. And in fact, there was a recent report in 2021 in which we demonstrated that up to 12% of the videos on YouTube infringe their own community guidelines. So, what are they doing about this? I believe that we need to put pressure on companies offering services to people that prey on their weaknesses, and they actually take advantage of their weaknesses, or for example, that they don't put a stop into their detriment within a system. And I know that the majority of them, because they're sitting in the US, which is a country in the world where consumers have very little rights, they don't think that they have to do that for us here in Europe. But I advocate for us to demand this type of tweaks within their AI systems so that our citizens will not be subject to these hells, that some young people suffer in social media. And this is why I believe in the famous Carta Magna, because we need to start distinguishing how we want Europeans to enjoy and benefit from AI and digital services, and probably lead the way for other nations that will believe in our principles, even though they might be in other geographies. So I always recommend that educating users is fundamental, and I think that we should probably embed it into schools and education systems. They should have a subject called how to use social media and how not to use it. It's kind of like when in the 1950s sexual education was put in the curriculum. Well, I think that it's fundamental for European young people to know how they can protect themselves, how they can protect friends, and how can they demand that their fundamental rights are respected, even though they're using AI systems developed in other nations.
Thank you. Voy a aprovechar la cuestión para contar una anécdota porque me ha recordado la pregunta sobre los sistemas de inteligencia artificial de control de contenidos en las plataformas. Digo, para ilustrar de alguna forma cómo algunas herramientas de inteligencia artificial necesitan todavía pulir mucho más su funcionamiento en muchos sentidos. Hace no tanto tiempo, una persona que tiene una página en Instagram, que funciona fundamentalmente en Instagram, sobre historia, me contactó conmigo. Por cierto, a mí me gusta mucho. Contactó conmigo porque tenía problemas porque el motor de búsqueda de inteligencia artificial, cada vez que él hablaba del pueblo mongol, de los mongoles tradicionales, detectaba que estaba insultando a las personas que tienen síndrome de Down. Y esto se refiere a que en español hay una palabra pues no demasiado bonita, pero que utiliza ese concepto de mongol de manera común para llamar a las personas con síndrome de Down, cosa que, por supuesto, con el paso del tiempo pues ya se ve que no se debe utilizar, ¿no? Pero en la práctica el motor de inteligencia artificial es incapaz de distinguir cuando se utiliza mongol en un sentido peyorativo o cuando se utiliza mongol en el sentido del pueblo de Gengis Khan. Y entonces el pobre llevaba un montón de tiempo que no podía hablar de Gengis Khan ni de nadie porque estaba a punto de que le cerraran la página, que me llamó muchísimo la atención, ¿no? Por cierto, que ahora que estamos regulando precisamente las responsabilidades de las plataformas y la transparencia, lo difícil, lo complicadísimo que es contactar con nadie de Instagram para poder arreglar algo que a priori es tan sencillo como eso. Por lo menos que le quiten las sanciones anteriores para que no le cierren a la siguiente la página, ¿no? Pero bueno, algo tal y como sí. En fin, now I'm going to switch the floor to our last speaker, that is our colleague from the S&D group, Mia Petra Kumpula-Natri, that is the first vice chair of the Artificial Intelligence and Digital Age Special Committee. So she's going to make the concluding remarks. Mia Petra, if you are online, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Iban, and all the speakers. I missed a great bit due to the reason that there were two other meetings, and one of them also that Citizens Panel for the Future of Europe has gathered several times, and also on digital matters. So now when we think about, together with the citizens, together with the members of national parliaments, together with the institutions and MEPs, we also have a word of citizens, how they see and what they suggest that Europe should do. I could pose the same question for the great speakers, that what we can still do on the AI Act now. So please send us a lot of good amendment proposals that we can act immediately. But then also this gives food for thought for many of participants, and I'm happy this record is publicly available later to have understanding for the digital literacy from the more perspective, broad perspective than only the piece of legislation we can do, but also what is much needed. So I think in order to democratize the digital revolution and try to keep this metaverse or digitalization in the hands of the democratic societies, we need to embrace programs, education systems, everything that helps citizens to understand it, because you cannot really participate if you don't have understanding and literacy. So we do not only the digital revolution for the few, but for the all, and then it really comes to the knowledge of the different levels, but everyone should have access to have the basic skills and knowledge to understand and then participate. So this is kind of basic level that is also always close to my mind. Watching the movies to understand the blood is ketchup is not enough today, but when driving a car, having the kind of general trust and understanding how the self-driving car is composed. Is it the way that Emma was mentioning, that it's designed for the human use, or is it designed according to the principles of business only, or some other reasons going over the human centricity? I'm happy also it was mentioned by the chair that the Charter of the Citizens' Rights is something that we want to look at and put our thoughts behind the idea that more is needed than the interinstitutional declaration, what will be the first step. But as it will be hopefully done in between the institution, it also should have them some legal implications, even that to guide all the legislation we do. And this is actually good, because then it covers all the sectors. And as everybody following the parliamentary work now, we do work on the platforms a lot, very concrete for the citizens, that how to see that issues that what is illegal offline should be illegal online. And now I quote that I very much think that the same citizens' rights or human rights we have in the analog world should be still remembered in the digital world. So as basics, we might be happy of the charters of the human rights, but then there are some cases that we have to underline that we take them a human-centric way to the digital world. But more closely on the literacy, I think we need also the knowledge and very high knowledge, so that the systems are well carried on and designed. So the very good designers, very good coding and knowledge, very good research and universities, everything in Europe too. So the top tier research infrastructure is the first, and then the leading education and research organizations. For AI especially, we have supported strongly as a group the distributed AI research centers. And for me, that also means that AI is developed in many sectors, and also the education needs to be taken. The AI knowledge and ways to understand the digitalization needs to be taken to all the sectors, whether it's on health, whether it's on construction, whether you are studying an engineer on engineer on energy, whether you are a teacher, or you name what would be the area of education without knowledge on the AI, and from the bottom to the top. But then also to democratize, we may not leave out the citizens with the vulnerabilities, or the age, or the gender, or the race, or whatever. So also we really have to reach everyone to keep them on board, to have digitalization for all and by all, with citizens and for the citizens. There is one special remark I also want to make. Very proud of the elements of AI mentioned by Dr. Pilvi Torsti from Finland, the country I also know best, but then also by Lucia Sciolli, and then also that there are new MOOCs developed, so everyone will have access on those, and I'm happy that you can take it in all the EU languages. And then also this is an AI, but then what lies always behind the AI is the data. So how to understand data? How much we touched the question on the Instagram knowing about you, but then really the data economy is mind-blowing, and the data is everywhere, the basis for the AI. So kind of my data, where the data is developed, who has the access, all that understanding should be also taken on board. We have been championing in EU for the code, so that everybody should have basic knowledge, or at least understanding on the coding, and now on the AI, but also the data and the whole structure. If you need to understand the finance or money, you need to nowadays understand more the data and how it is steering the world. So just to mention that this understanding the AI, understanding the data literacy, or so it is many components in that one. And still, I think we should not make it too complicated and demystify it. It is not very difficult, but it's nowadays it seems to be that once you try to understand, you immediately have a lot of letters that they just like I use AI, should I say artificial intelligence all the time. So all these terms that are not familiar for all the citizens, and it is also us for the policymakers when we do legislation, that we speak normal language, even we speak about the digital world, because there is digital world for everyone, and then the language should be alike. So every European have to have an open door to digitalization, and it is best carried with the safe surroundings, and we are there making legislation so that it is not only your consent and your duty. We have to guarantee a society that is fair, just, and transparency plays a role there, and then active citizenship is possible when we all have the basic knowledge on the literacy. Thank you on my behalf for all the great speeches, and I will listen to for the second time those I heard, and what I missed. I happy to have this in the YouTube available for every European and all the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. We are on time, so we accomplished our task even in this way, because all of the addresses, all of the speakers were talking about many different and interesting points. I think we managed to have a complete pint of the topic itself. voy a terminar y voy a hacer una última conclusión, aunque es verdad que mi compañera acaba de hacerlas de manera general muy bien, solo para recordar que esta cuestión de la ilustración digital no es un tema menor, no es una cuestión que deba ser simplemente un anexo o algo que sea nombrado de manera casual en la regulación y las normas que vayamos a impulsar desde la Unión Europea. Y en ese sentido, creemos que que el reglamento que se está discutiendo necesita incorporar más elementos que puedan garantizar esta cuestión a todo el nivel de las administraciones. Nos dirigimos, en definitiva, no a usuarios, que a mí tampoco me gusta utilizar mucho el término, mucho menos el de consumidores, sino que nos dirigimos a ciudadanos y ciudadanas que tienen el derecho de conocer qué es lo que está ocurriendo en sus sociedades, tienen el derecho también a tener sociedades mucho más justas, mucho más democráticas y en las que además se pueda asegurar que el desarrollo se genera y se va elevando desde el punto de vista de un desarrollo acompasado, que no se va quedando nadie atrás, que no hay ni personas, ni grupos vulnerables, ni tampoco territorios que se van quedando muy detrás de otros en el desarrollo y en la conquista del futuro, y sobre todo que todo el mundo tiene también un nivel de protección similar en cuanto al desarrollo de tecnologías que nos ofrecen muchísimas oportunidades y en ese sentido creo que hay que subrayar siempre que estamos ante un cambio que va a ser necesariamente positivo para la humanidad, pero que, por supuesto, comportan también pues muchos riesgos. Así que, una vez más, muchísimas gracias a los participantes por estar con nosotros y con nosotras. Espero que este seminario haya sido muy útil. Desde luego, desde mi perspectiva lo es. He apuntado un montón de ideas y me salgo con algunas cuestiones ya para la parte más práctica desde el punto de vista de la labor legislativa y de trabajo en el Parlamento. Y ya para terminar, y hablando de justicia, solo quiero añadir que fuerza para Ucrania, vive la Ucrania, long live to Ucrania, and slava Ukraini. Thank you very much to all. Gracias a todo el mundo por asistir.